The first thing they teach you in survey school is to respect the instruments. You trust your scanner before you trust your eyes, because your eyes will lie to you on an alien world, and your scanner, mostly, will not. The second thing they teach you, and they say it only once, quietly, the way you tell someone something you hope they never need to remember, is this. If the instrument goes dark, you pull back. You log the anomaly. You do not improvise. I have improvised exactly once in 14 years of survey work. I will not say I regret it, but I will say that everything I thought I understood about myself, about my family, about what the word inheritance could possibly mean, all of it came apart in the span of about 30 seconds on a cold plateau on the edge of the Vethara Basin, and I have spent every day since trying to reassemble it into something I can carry. My name is Mara Quellen. I was a Class 3 civilian land surveyor attached to the Meridian Colonial Authority, Secondary Survey Division. Secondary Division means you go to the places primary already gave up on, the sites that returned incomplete data, the zones with persistent instrument interference, the locations that got flagged and shelved because nobody had the budget or the patience to figure out why they kept producing nonsense. You go back, you try again, you document whatever you can, and if you still can't document it, you write a very careful report explaining what you couldn't document and why, and then some administrator files it in a drawer, and the site gets flagged for a third review in another decade or so, and the whole thing starts over. I was good at it. Not brilliant, I want to be honest about that. I was methodical, patient. I did not mind working alone, is the true prerequisite for secondary division work, because most of the sites are too remote and too low priority to justify a full team. I had a pack, a scanner array, a portable shelter unit, and a standing order to produce a minimum viable survey report on each assigned site within 30 field days. I had been doing it for 14 years, and in those 14 years I had never once produced a report that anyone found particularly remarkable. That was fine with me. Remarkable reports meant remarkable complications, review boards, specialist consultations, authority sign-offs, jurisdictional disputes between colonial authority divisions, who all suddenly wanted a piece of whatever you had found. Unremarkable reports meant a clean file, a completed assignment, and the next site on the list. I liked the next site on the list. I liked the rhythm of it, the transport, the drop, the setup, the work, the filing, the return. 14 years of it had given me a kind of peace that I could not have explained to anyone who had not also spent significant time alone in places that did not particularly care whether you were there or not. The Warden-Stone of the Vethara Plateau had been flagged for third review for 11 years. I read the file on the transport out. It was not a long file. The primary survey team had reached the plateau in the third year of the Vethara Basin colonization push, logged the stone as a geological anomaly of possible pre-settlement origin, and deployed a standard contact scanner. The scanner had returned 6 seconds of data, a baseline material reading, inconclusive for artificial construction, and then gone dark. Not malfunctioned, the team lead had been careful to note. Dark. As in, functioning normally, in contact with the object, and then producing nothing at all, as though the object had simply decided to stop being readable. The team had tried 3 units, gotten the same result with each, and pulled back. The report called the stone a Class 5 anomaly and recommended further study. Nobody had gone back for 11 years. The second review team had gone back 4 years after that, spent 2 days on the plateau, deployed a newer generation of scanner, and gotten 9 seconds of data before their unit went dark. Their report upgraded the stone to Class 3 anomaly, noted the instrument interference was consistent across equipment generations, recommended physical contact scanning as a possible workaround, and added a foot suggesting that the stone's shape, roughly columnar, approximately 4 meters tall, clearly not a natural formation despite its weathered surface, might indicate deliberate construction by an unknown pre-settlement civilization. That footnote had been underlined in red by someone in the colonial authority, and then, apparently, nothing had happened for 7 years. I was the third review. I have wondered since then whether the assignment was random. Secondary division assignments are nominally generated by algorithmic priority, backlog age, flagging severity, resource availability. But algorithms are built by people, and people in administrative positions sometimes adjust weights in ways that do not show in the documentation. Someone in the colonial authority had underlined that footnote in red. Someone 7 years later, a Class 3 Quellen on the Vethara Plateau assignment. I do not know whether those were the same someone. I do not know whether the assignment was chance or arrangement or something older and less articulable than either. What I know is that it was my assignment, and I took it and I went. I landed on the plateau on a Tuesday, if you keep planetary standard time, which I do out of habit. The transport dropped me at the survey marker the second team had planted, and was gone before I had my pack on my shoulders. The plateau was wide and gray, basalt underlaid with something harder, and the sky above it was the particular shade of pale silver blue you get on, with a thin atmosphere and a distant sun. It was cold. Not brutal cold, I have worked in brutal cold, but the persistent, settled cold of a place that does not often get warm. The cold of altitude and wind and a sun that gives light more readily than heat. The plateau grasses, if you could call them that, were low and reddish purple. They moved in the wind in long, slow waves that made the whole plateau look like it was breathing. The Warden-Stone was approximately 800 meters from the survey marker. I could see it from where I stood. Every survey report I had ever read described anomalous sites as undistinguished, easy to overlook, smaller than expected. The Warden-Stone was none of those things. It was exactly as tall as the second team had reported, 4 meters, perhaps a little more. And it stood absolutely upright on the plateau, with the vertical precision of something that had been placed, grown or pushed up by geological force. It was dark, not black, dark the way old iron gets dark, the way stone gets dark, when it has been in shadow for long enough, that the color becomes less a property of the material, and more a property of accumulated time. It was slightly wider at the base than at the top, and the surface, even from 800 meters, looked worked. Not rough, not natural, but carved or shaped to a finish that the plateau wind and the years had worn without erasing. I stood and looked at it for a long time before I started walking toward it. The other thing about secondary division work that they do not put in the training materials. Primary teams go to exciting sites with full equipment and the expectation of discovery. Secondary teams go to sites that have already refused to cooperate. By the time you get there, the site has already said no to at least 2 sets of professionals with better gear than you. You learn not to go in with expectations. You go in with patience and a notebook, and the quiet professional acknowledgement that you may well spend 30 days on this plateau, and leave with nothing more than the second team left with, and that will still be a complete and legitimate piece of work. Set up my shelter unit at 300 meters from the stone. Survey protocol for Class 3 anomalies requires you to establish a base camp at a minimum of 215 meters from the object. I added 50 out of what I told myself was professionalism, and what I suspect was something older and less articulable than that. The stone from 300 meters did not look smaller. If anything, it looked larger. Scale does strange things when there is nothing else on a flat plateau to give your eye a reference. I spent my first 3 days doing everything at distance. Aerial mapping from my drone array. Soil composition sampling at expanding radii from the stone's base, none closer than 50 meters. Atmospheric readings. Photographic documentation from every angle the drone could manage. I was thorough. I produced, in those 3 days, more baseline data than either previous team had compiled in their full visits. None of it told me anything that the previous teams had not already noted. The stone was not geological, was almost certainly constructed, predated any known civilization in the Vethara Basin by a margin the soil dating could not put a firm number on. The dating equipment simply read, uncertain at that depth, which was itself a data point, and sat on the plateau with a stillness that felt, on some level I am not able to justify scientifically, deliberate. I ate my field meals facing the stone. I logged my observations every evening in the flat, dry language of survey notation. I slept in my shelter and woke in the pre-dawn chill and ran my drone routes and watched the stone from various distances and took careful notes about how it looked from each of them. It looked the same from all of them, is itself a statement. Most objects look different depending on angle and light and distance. The Warden-Stone looked like itself from everywhere I stood, as though its essential character was not a product of perspective. On the fourth day, I deployed my scanner. I want to be clear about the scanner I was using. Secondary Division does not get the newest equipment. We get equipment that is 2 or 3 generations back from current, refurbished and certified, perfectly functional for most survey applications. My unit was a Kellen Price Series 7, which was considered a solid mid-tier instrument when it was new about 8 years prior. The second team had used a Series 9. Mine was older. I mention this because later, when I wrote my report, I was asked several times whether I believed my equipment had been adequate, and my answer then is my answer now. The scanner was not the variable. I brought the scanner to 50 meters, which is the minimum safe working distance for initial contact range scanning on a Class 3 anomaly. The unit powered up normally. I ran a self-diagnostic which came back clean. I aimed the contact array at the stone's midsection, which offered the largest unbroken surface area, and initiated a passive scan. The unit returned 6 seconds of data. Then it went dark. Not malfunctioned. Not a power failure. The display simply went blank, and the unit sat in my hands with the weight of something that had simply stopped having opinions. I powered it down and powered it up again. It ran its self-diagnostic. I aimed it at the stone. 6 seconds. Dark. Tried 3 separate scan profiles over the next 2 hours. Each time, 6 seconds, then nothing. The duration was consistent enough to be meaningful, and I noted it carefully. 6 seconds was not random. 6 seconds was a threshold. The stone was not broken, was not passive, was not simply a geological object that happened to interfere with electronics. It was assessing. The scanner read it, and it read the scanner, and in 6 seconds it made a judgment, and the judgment was always the same, not this one. On the 5th day I moved to 30 meters and tried again. 6 seconds. Dark. The stone did not care about proximity. It cared about something else entirely, and proximity was not it. On the 6th day, I was sitting on a flat rock at 30 meters, eating a field ration and looking at the stone, and I was thinking about the footnote in the second team's report, physical contact scanning as a possible workaround. They had recommended it without attempting it, which I understood. Their protocol had not authorized direct physical contact with a Class 3 anomaly without safety team clearance, and they had not had a safety team present. Neither did I. My standing orders technically did not authorize direct contact either. They authorized a minimum viable survey report by whatever non-destructive non-contact means available. I looked at the stone. The stone did not look at me. Stones do not look at things, I know this. I am telling you what it felt like, which is different. Down the field ration. I stood up. I walked to 15 meters and stopped and looked at the stone from there for a while. The surface, up close, was not what it appeared from a distance. From a distance it looked worn, smoothed by time and wind. Up close and 15 meters is close enough that the detail resolves. I could see that the surface was carved, not crudely carved. Finely, precisely, with the controlled intentionality of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had tools adequate to the task. The carvings were not pictorial. They were not figures or scenes. They were geometric, interlocking angular shapes that nested into each other in patterns that almost resolved into something recognizable before stepping sideways into something that did not. Covered the entire surface of the stone that I could see. Every centimeter. The second team's report had called the surface worn. Think they had been looking at it from too far away. It was not worn. It was complete. I walked to 10 meters. My scanner stayed in my pack. I want to be precise about this. What I did next was not a scan. It was not an attempt to collect data. I have asked myself many times since then why I walked to 10 meters, why I kept walking past 10 meters. And the honest answer is that after 6 days of careful, methodical, protocol-compliant work, I was standing in front of something that had been waiting for 11 years to be looked at properly, and I was looking at it properly, and something in me, something below the level of professional training and survey protocol, and the sensible caution that had kept me employed and alive for 14 years, something in me simply said closer. I walked to the stone. I stood directly in front of it. The top of it was well above my head, a meter above, perhaps a little more, and from directly in front, The carvings were close enough that I could have traced them with my finger without extending my arm fully. The material, up close, was not quite like any stone I had worked near before. It had a depth to it that stone should not have. Translucency, it was not translucent, but the way very old, very dense materials sometimes seem to hold something inside them that light cannot reach but the eye senses anyway. The cold came off it in a way that was not quite temperature. I am aware that is not a scientific description. I am telling you what I experienced. There was a smell too, faint and difficult to categorize. Not mineral, not organic, something between the two. The way the air smells just before a change in weather. When the pressure drops and the world seems to inhale. I stood in that smell and looked at the carvings at eye level and tried to find a pattern in them that I could name, and I could not name one. After a while I stopped trying. I took my glove off my right hand. Survey protocol for direct physical contact with a Class 3 anomaly is, do not. I took my glove off anyway. The air on my bare hand was cold and still. The plateau wind had dropped, I realized. Some time in the last few minutes. I could not have told you exactly when. The reddish-purple grasses at the plateau's edge had stopped moving. The world had gone quiet in a way I had not registered until that moment, and registering it then did not frighten me the way it perhaps should have. It felt less like silence and more like attention. The plateau was watching, if plateaus can watch, and I was aware of being watched, and I was not afraid. I pressed my palm flat against the stone. The cold was immediate and absolute, a cold that went through the skin and into the bone in the first second, and then in the second changed, not warming exactly, but differentiating, becoming something more complex than simple temperature, something that had direction and texture to it. Beneath my palm, the surface felt carved even where it looked smooth. Fine channels and ridges too small to see that my fingertips registered as something between texture and language. I held still. I did not pull back. The 6th second passed. Nothing went dark. In the 7th second, the stone moved. Not physically. It did not shift or crack or shudder. What moved was the carvings. The geometric patterns on the surface directly beneath my hand began to illuminate from within. Not glowing the way heated metal glows. Not the blue-white of an instrument display. A deep, saturated violet, the color of the sky at the exact moment before a storm breaks when the light goes strange, and everything in the world seems to be holding its breath. The violet spread outward from my palm in a ring, moving up the face of the stone, and around its sides following the carved channels, as though the channels had always been conduits waiting for exactly this current. Within 4 or 5 seconds, I was not counting carefully. I was not capable of counting carefully in that moment. The entire visible surface of the stone was illuminated, every carved line lit from within, the geometric patterns, suddenly and completely legible as a single interconnected design that covered the stone from base to top. I did not move my hand. The plateau around me was absolutely silent. No wind, no grass movement. The distant sound of the survey drone I had left running 300 meters away was gone. I discovered later it had simply landed itself, drawn down by some field effect I could not measure. The light from the stone's carvings fell on the basalt plateau around me in violet-tinged shadows, and in that light, the gray rock looked ancient in a way it had not looked before. Ancient the way things look when you suddenly understand how old they actually are. Not geological time old, which is a number. Old in the way of accumulated purpose, the age of a thing that has been doing the same thing for so long that doing it has become what it is. Felt the hum before I heard it. It started in my palm, moved up my arm, settled into my chest as something that was not quite sound, and not quite vibration, but had properties of both. A resonance, the way a very large bell resonates in the body of whoever stands nearest when it is struck. It built slowly, not dramatically, not with any sense of threat or violence, but with a steadiness that felt earned. The way a door opens when the right key is finally used. The way an engine turns over after a long, cold start. Something that had been patient and was now simply continuing. The light in the carvings shifted. The violet deepened for a moment, the way a flame deepens when it catches something solid, and then, beginning at the top of the stone, where I could not see, and moving downward. Something changed in the character of the light. It became directional. It began to find me. By the time the light reached the level of my face, it was no longer simply the carvings that were illuminated. The entire surface of the stone had acquired a faint luminescence, uniform and cool and violet, and that light was oriented toward me, with the quiet specificity of a face turning toward a voice it recognized. I am describing this as accurately as I can. The stone turned its light toward me. I do not have better language for it. The hum resolved into something that had pitch. Low and precise, not musical in any human sense, but structured, intentional, product of a mechanism that knew exactly what it was producing. It was not random frequency, it was a signal. Even in that moment, some portion of my mind that had been doing survey work for 14 years registered it as a signal, and tried to classify it, and failed, and sat back and waited. Then the stone spoke. I do not know how else to say it. The sound came from within the stone, from wherever those carved channels ran in 3 dimensions, that I could not see from outside, and it carried the full resonance of the stone's mass behind it. Not loud, not overwhelming, absolute in the way the sounds of very large and very old things are absolute. It filled the plateau not by volume but by completeness, the way certain silences fill a room. There was no distortion, no echo, no artifact of the open air around us, just the sound, clean and final, as something that had been waiting to be said for a very long time. The words were in a language I did not know, and I understood them. I do not expect anyone who has not experienced this to credit it easily. I am a surveyor. I have a technical education and a practical mind, and I have never had any gift for languages. I speak colonial standard and basic merchants, Vetheran, and that is all. But I understood those words the way you understand things you always knew. The way you understand your own name when someone says it. The way you understand the weight of something you have been carrying so long you forgot. It was not part of you, the stone said. First of your line to return, Warden. 7 words. I am certain of the count, because I have replayed them in my memory every day since. The way you replay the moment something irreversible happened, counting the components as though the count will explain the thing itself. First of your line to return, Warden. I stood with my hand flat against the stone, and I felt the light on my face, and I did not move for a long time. Is a thing that happens when a piece of information lands in you that is too large for the frame you have built for yourself. The frame does not shatter. That would be almost easier. It simply becomes inadequate. It sits there, the same frame it always was, and everything it was built to contain is still inside it. And the new thing is also inside it somehow. And for a moment, the mind does a very quiet, very thorough reckoning of what will have to change. That reckoning is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It proceeds the way deep structural work always proceeds. Silently, in the load-bearing places, while the surface stays still. Science was still on the stone. The light was still as my face. The hum had not stopped. It had settled into something lower and steadier. A ground tone, an acknowledgement rather than a summons. Warden. I had not known that word in the context the stone was using it. I knew it, the way I knew colonial standard. As a functional term, administrative, carrying the weight of duty and oversight. The stone was not using it the way colonial standard used it. The stone was using it as a title, as the name of a thing that existed before there was language to describe it. A role, a function, a lineage, the specific human purpose, for which a specific line of humans had been bred or chosen or simply grown, the way certain trees grow towards certain light over generations, that neither the tree nor the light remembers clearly, but that the growth itself is in the direction of every branch. First of your line to return, I am Mara Quellen. My mother was Essa Quellen, who was a school teacher on the Vethara Basin Colony's eastern settlement, and who died when I was 11 of a respiratory condition that is entirely treatable now, but was less entirely treatable then. My father was Davin Quellen, who I knew less well, who had been a surveyor himself before a knee injury took him out of field work when I was 4, who died when I was 23 of something cardiac and unspectacular. I have no siblings, I have no children. I have, to my knowledge, no family outside the colonial basin records which list the Quellen name, going back 3 generations to the first colony ships and then stopping. The way colonial family records always stop at the edge of the old world, the records lost or untranslated, or simply absent. because the people who carried them were focused on surviving the transit and not on documentation. The stone's first word had been first. Not last, not only, not the sole survivor of something extinguished. First. First of your line to return. Turn, not arrive. Return, which implies a previous departure, a somewhere come from, prior relationship with this place or this stone or whatever the warden function actually was. Return implies that whoever my line was, wherever it had come from, there had been a time before the colony ships, before the generation that got lost in the records, before whatever series of displacements and migrations and forgotten histories had deposited one Maraquellan on a secondary division assignment on a cold plateau in the Vethara Basin. When someone from my line had stood here, or somewhere like here, and had been known by this stone, and had been called Warden, and had eventually gone away, and not come back. Not for long enough that the stone had been waiting. My hand off the stone. The violet light did not go out. It dimmed, moved from active to steady, difference between a signal and a presence, and stayed. The hum dropped further in pitch and volume, but did not stop. The stone was not shutting down. It had simply shifted from summoning to waiting. It was waiting for me, I understood. In the way it had been waiting for anyone from my line, patiently, without distress, with the settled certainty of something that has always known, the wait has an end. I sat down on the basalt in front of it. I am not sure I sat down voluntarily. My legs made the decision and my body followed, and I sat on the cold hard rock of the Vethara Plateau and I looked at the illuminated stone, and I thought about my father. He had been a surveyor. I have said this. What I did not think to investigate, 10 years, of following him into this career, out of some combination of aptitude and inheritance, and the simple fact that it was the work I found myself most capable of, was why he had been a surveyor. He had grown up on the colony, same as I had. His parents had been ordinary settlers. There was no reason, on the face of it, for the Quellan family to produce 2 generations of people drawn to go and find things in remote places that other people had missed. No reason on the face of it. My father had worked the Vethara Basin himself before his knee, not secondary division. He had been primary, which is the better posting, better equipment and higher priority assignments. He had worked the Eastern Rim, mostly the parts of the basin that opened up first in the colony expansion. He had never, as far as I knew, come near the Central Plateau. But he had worked the basin, and his father far before him had reportedly been a miner in the basin's early years, and his father's father, whose name the records gave as Davine, 1 letter off from my father's, had been on the first colony ship, one of the engineers who had selected the landing site. I had never thought about why they selected the landing site they did. The Vethara Basin site had seemed, at the time of colonization, like a practical choice. Good water access, reasonable soil composition, defensible terrain. The colonial authorities' records attributed it to sound frontier judgment and the expertise of the engineering team. But it had placed the colony, and all its subsequent expansion, in the basin that surrounded this plateau. Within reach of this stone, of your line to return, my great-great-grandfather, or whoever it was, however far back the line ran before the record stopped, had not come back himself. But he had perhaps come close, had perhaps placed the colony as near as he safely could, had perhaps put roots down in the closest reachable soil, 3 or 4 generations deep, and then died hoping that someone in the line would eventually find their way up the plateau. Or not died hoping, died knowing, in the way that people sometimes know things. They cannot say in the language of their time, carrying the knowledge the way the body carries a structural memory. In the part of a person that does not require words. Perhaps the stone had been waiting longer than that. The soil dating had read uncertain at the relevant depth. Uncertain is not a number. Certain could be a very large number. I do not know. I still do not know. There is a great deal I still do not know, and I have come to believe that, not knowing most of it may be the appropriate condition for someone who has just been told they are a warden and has not yet found anyone who can explain to them what a warden actually does. I sat on the plateau for, according to my suit's internal clock, I checked afterward, 3 hours and 22 minutes. The stone's light stayed steady throughout. The plateau stayed still. At some point the wind came back, and the grasses at the plateau's edge began to move again. But around the stone, the air remained calm, and I sat in that calm and thought about all the things I was going to have to reconsider. What I arrived at, sitting there, was not understanding. I want to be clear about that. I did not understand what the stone was, or what my line was, or what the warden function required of me, or why the stone had waited, or what it had been here to guard. I did not understand any of it in the sense of having information that explained it. What I had was the word, the title, and the recognition, and the bone-deep sense that both of those things were real and structural and not going away. That was enough for 3 hours and 22 minutes to sit with. When I stood up, I felt the cold in my legs that comes from sitting on basalt for a long time in low temperatures, which is an ordinary and physical sensation, and I was grateful for it. The ordinary things were still there. I was still Mara Quellen, Class 3 Civilian Land Surveyor, Secondary Division, Meridian Colonial Authority. My shelter was still 300 meters away. My scanner array was still in my pack. I still had a minimum viable survey report to produce. I looked at the stone for a while. Then I put my hand back on it, flat the way I had before, and I said, quietly and out loud on the empty plateau, with no one to hear me and nothing to hear me except the stone itself, I'm going to need to know more. The light in the carvings shifted. The hum changed register, not louder, but richer, the way a voice sounds when it is answering rather than waiting. What came next was not words. It was something else, something that went in through the hand and settled in the places, below language, below memory, below anything I have a name for, and began the slow, patient work of making itself understood. I cannot describe the content of it, because the content of it did not have the shape of describable things. It had the shape of a direction, a weight, a sense of what was north and what was not, in some coordinate system that had nothing to do with compass headings. I stood there for another hour and a half. What I can tell you about that hour and a half is nothing that would survive a technical report. I can tell you that when I took my hand off the stone the second time, the violet light stayed at the same steady level it had held since I first made contact, and that, when I walked back to my shelter, the stone's glow was visible from 300 meters in the thin late afternoon light of the Vethara sun, and that it was still glowing when I woke in the morning, and the morning after that, and every morning of the remaining 24 days of my survey assignment. I returned to the stone every one of those 24 days. Some days I put my hand against it for minutes. Some days I stood there for hours. The contact was never the same twice. The hum changed. The light changed. The quality of what passed through the connection changed. But the connection itself was consistent and stable, and I began to understand, in a way I could not have articulated in the first days, that the stone had not simply recognized me and then discharged its obligation. It was not a door that had unlocked and was done. It was a relay. It had been waiting to deliver something, and what it had to deliver was not a single statement, but an accumulation. A body of knowledge or instruction or history that was too large to pass on one contact and that was built to be transferred over time. The way you teach something to someone who is ready to learn it, not all at once, but in the order that makes sense, in the sequence that makes each new piece comprehensible, because the pieces before it have already been laid. The stone was teaching me something. What it was teaching me, I am still in the process of receiving. I completed the minimum viable survey report on the 29th day of my assignment. I listed the stone as a Class 1 constructed artifact of unknown origin and pre-colonial age, noted the instrument interference as consistent with an active energy field of unknown type, documented the physical contact activation event in full, and attached my suit's recorded data from the activation sequence. I filed the report to the Colonial Authority the day before my transport arrived. Did not include the words the stone had spoken. I listed the contact event, the light activation, the energy resonance, the sustained glow. I did not include 7 words. Some things are not for reports. Some things are not for any document that will be filed in a colonial authority, drawer and reviewed by administrators who will underline portions of it in red, and then do nothing for 7 years. Transport came and took me back. The colonial authority scheduled a response team, full equipment, specialists from the Xenoarchaeology Division, a safety team. They arrived 6 weeks later. I was back in the secondary division rotation by then, on a different site, a different basin, a different anomaly entirely, cataloging something that was not waiting for anyone in particular. I heard from one of the xenoarchaeologists, 6 months after that. He reached me by message, professional and circumspect, asking if I had experienced anything during the contact event that I had not included in the official report. He was careful about how he phrased it. I wrote back and said the report contained everything that was technically documentable. He wrote back and said he understood, and that the stone remained active. The glow had not diminished in the 6 months since my visit, and that it refused contact with every subsequent researcher, every instrument, every physical approach made by the survey and xenoarchaeology teams, fused in the original way, dark after 6 seconds, or simply unresponsive when approached by hand. It was responding to me, he wrote, carefully, to my presence. The field readings it produced, which they had managed to log in some detail now, showed different characteristics in my initial activation data versus all subsequent contact attempts. Specifically, the initial activation had shown a recognition pattern in the field output, a deliberate orientation. Something, he wrote, choosing its words with great care, that looked less like a geological event and more like a decision. I thanked him for the update and closed the message. I have thought about the word decision every day since. The stone made a decision. That is what he was telling me, in the careful language of a scientist who could not quite say what he meant in a way that would survive peer review. The stone looked at who was touching it and made a decision. It made that decision 6 seconds in, which is why 6 seconds was the limit. 6 seconds was how long the assessment took. It had been making that assessment for 11 years, every time someone touched it or aimed a scanner at it. And it had been getting the wrong answer, every time, until I put my bare palm against its surface on a cold afternoon on the Vethara Plateau, after 6 days of careful distance and 1 moment of something I cannot call anything other than instinct. But here is what I have understood, slowly in the month since, through the accumulation of what the stone has been teaching me, in the sessions I have managed to return for. 6 seconds was not how long the assessment took. 6 seconds was how long the stone's patience extended to the wrong candidate. 6 seconds was courtesy. 6 seconds was the stone being thorough enough to confirm what it already knew in the first instant of contact, giving each visitor the full consideration of its attention before it quietly withdrew. It knew, each time, in the first fraction of a second. It always knew. The 6 seconds was the time it took to be certain, or, and this is the interpretation I find myself returning to, the one that settles most heavily in the places where the stone's transmissions have been landing. The 6 seconds was the time it took to be kind, to give the wrong person a moment of contact with something ancient before declining them, to not be abrupt about it. The Warden-Stone, whatever else it is not unkind. I am 41 years old, I have no children. My parents are dead and their parents before them, as far back as the records go, which is not far enough. I do not know what the warden function requires in full, or what the stone was built to guard, or how long the line ran before the records that carry it stopped. I do not know whether there are other stones, other wardenship sites, other places that have been waiting in their own patient way, for someone from a specific line to come back. I have put in for a reassignment, Secondary Division, Vethara Basin, ongoing. The Colonial Authority approved it without much question. Secondary Division does not often get surveyors who request specific long-term postings. I expect I will be on the Vethara Plateau for a long time. The stone will be there. It has been there for a very long time already. Whatever it is waiting for me to understand, it has the patience for it. That at least, I am certain of. I have learned, in the months since my hand first touched that carved surface, to stop expecting the understanding to come all at once, to arrive in some clean, complete moment that resolves the question of what I am, and what I owe, and what it means to be the first of a line to return. It does not work that way. It works the way the best things work, slowly in the grain, crewing the way knowledge accrues when you pay consistent attention to a thing that repays attention. The stone speaks, in its way, when I am there and patient and present. I learn a little more each time. I carry it carefully, the way you carry something old and valuable over uncertain ground, both hands, eyes forward, the full weight of your attention on the task. My father used to say, when I was young enough that I did not yet understand him, that the land knows where you're from. He said it the way people say things that have come down to them through so many tellings, that they no longer know if it's wisdom or just phrase. I thought then that it was just a phrase. I think now that it was something he knew in some part of himself that had no other language for it, something that had passed down to him in the same way it passed down to me, compressed and wordless and persistent, waiting for the moment it would be needed. He worked the Vethara Basin for 11 years. He never made it to the plateau. His knee gave out first, and then the rest of his life carried him elsewhere. And then his life ended, and the knowledge, if he had it, in whatever form it had in him, passed to me without any of the words that might have prepared me for it. That is how these things travel, I think. Not in documents, not in deliberate instruction, in the direction you find yourself walking when the choice is yours to make, in the work you find yourself drawn to, in the places you cannot explain why you keep returning to. He kept returning to the basin, not to the plateau, never to the plateau, his injury prevented it, but to the basin. Whenever he could find a secondary posting, whenever the authority needed someone, for the southern surveys he went until he could not go anymore. I understand now what he was circling, and I understand that he knew somewhere in him that he would not get there himself, that the work would pass on, that someone in the line would make it eventually to the plateau, that the stone would wait. It waited for him. It waited, I think, several generations before him. Patient, in the way that very old things are patient, in the way that something built to last an age understands that an age can contain many human lifetimes, and that the right human lifetime will eventually arrive. The stone did not despair. It is not built for despair. It is built for the long wait and for the recognition when the wait ends, for the patient transfer of everything it has held for whoever finally arrives. I am the one who finally arrived. First of your line to return, Warden. I say the words to myself sometimes in the quiet of the shelter on the plateau, in the pre-dawn dark before I walk out to the stone for the morning session. Not because they still surprise me. They have moved past surprise into something more settled, but because they are the most precise description of what I am that I have ever been given, and I am still, carefully and deliberately, learning what they mean. The stone guards. I will say this much, because I believe it is the part a person has the right to know. It is not a weapon. I want to be clear about that, because I have read enough colonial history to know that when someone finds an ancient, powerful, pre-settlement artifact that responds to a bloodline, the assumption that follows is almost always that the artifact is a weapon, a key to a weapon, or a repository of technology that can be made into a weapon. The stone is none of those things. What it guards is older than the impulse to make weapons, and more necessary and entirely without violence in its nature. It is a record, the oldest record I have encountered any evidence of. A record built not on surfaces that can be destroyed or in materials that can decay, in a medium I do not have a word for. Something that the stone's builders understood, and that I am slowly, through the sessions, beginning to understand in the limited way that a person can begin to understand something that was built for a mind much older than hers. The record is of us, of humanity, at a depth that the colonial authorities' oldest archives do not reach, at a breadth that would take more than one warden's lifetime to map. What we were before the records that survive. What we built, before the things we built collapsed or were forgotten, or simply became so ordinary that no one thought to write them down. Who we were, before we became the people whose children boarded colony ships and set down roots in Vethara basins, and lost track of where they came from. The stone was built to hold that, and to hold it until someone came who had the right to receive it. I am 41 years old, and I have the rest of whatever working life I have left, and I expect it will not be enough to receive all of it. But the stone is patient, and so am I. 14 years in secondary division will make you patient about most things, and we have made a start. My father used to say the land knows where you're from. He was right. He was more right than he knew. Is itself a kind of inheritance, leaving your children truths they will spend their lives growing into. The stone glows violet on the Vethara Plateau, steady as a heartbeat, visible on clear mornings from 300 meters. The xenoarchaeology team has built a perimeter around it, professional and thorough, and they take excellent readings of everything I do not tell them. And they will publish excellent papers about an anomalous artifact with field characteristics unlike anything in the known record, and those papers will be correct and thorough and will not contain the thing that matters. The thing that matters is not for papers. It is for the next Quellan who comes to the plateau. If I have done the work of the warden correctly, and they find the stone already lit, already waiting, already warm from the accumulated contact of a generation's worth of sessions, they will put their hand against it, and it will know them in 6 seconds. In less than 6 seconds, it will know them in the first instant of contact, as it has always known, and the 6 seconds will be the kindness of confirmation. And it will speak its line of recognition, different from mine, suited to them, and they will stand on the cold gray basalt in the pale silver-blue light of the Vethara sun, and understand, as I understood, that they are not at the beginning of something. They are at the continuation. That is the HFY of it, if you want to call it that. The thing that is specifically, structurally, undeniably human about what the stone chose to preserve and what it chose to wait for. It did not wait for a general. It did not wait for a diplomat or a scientist or a politician or anyone with institutional authority. It waited for a surveyor. It waited for a woman who spent 14 years going to places other people had already written off, looking carefully at things that had refused to cooperate, and staying until she understood what she was looking at. It waited for someone trained, by their whole life, to be patient with difficult things. I think that is not an accident. I think the warden function has always been exactly that. The patient person, in the right place, taking the time. Not the hero, not the chosen one in the sense of someone marked by fate for glory. The chosen one in the sense of someone whose entire character, built by circumstance and decision, and the accumulation of a life's worth of quiet choices, made them the right instrument for the work. The stone does not need glory. It needs someone who will come back tomorrow. I will come back tomorrow. I have always come back.